Thank you for joining today. I really do appreciate it. These are two topics that I have a great deal of passion about. And a couple of years ago, I was talking with a friend of mine, a coworker at Target at the time, and we were talking about music and we were talking about product, and we just kind of got talking about this idea that there was a lot of overlap in kind of how you think about improvisation and the act of improvisation in product management and in jazz, and that's really where the impetus came from. So thought I'd kind of introduce myself. I know some of you on the call, but for some of you, this is the first time we've met. My name is Eric Chaffee. I've been in software product management now for well over 20 years, which makes me feel old, and I think the gray beard is earned from that. What I think is interesting for my career, at least, I've really enjoyed the fact that I haven't worked in one kind of industry. I haven't even worked in one kind of business. I've worked in software companies that had 7 people. I've worked in ones that have grown. I've worked in ones that have died, spectacular deaths and quiet deaths. And I've even gone so far as to work for Target most recently and try to work a product model inside of a non-software product company. And so it's been really fun. Some of the logos you might recognize, there's probably quite a few that you've never heard of before, but that's kind of who I am, and I'm a self-professed product geek right now. Today, I work at, When I Work, I lead our product and design and care teams. And if you're not familiar with When I Work, we're a software company based here in Minneapolis. Our goal is to help hourly teams work better together. We provide employee scheduling and time tracking software. So if you've ever worked an hourly job, you know the challenge it is to find out when you work, when your shifts are. Heaven forbid if you ever can't make a shift or you need time off. What we do is we provide a mobile application that employees can use to get their schedule, ask for time off, show their availability, trade shifts, clock in, clock out, and do all those sorts of activities. And we've been around for about 10 years, and we have roughly 1 million users, 1 million people getting their schedules on every day. I will put a plug in right now. Even though we've gone through, the economics of the world are not great. We do have a new opening for a senior product manager. If you've got experience in B2B, you've got experience in mid-market or enterprise product management, and especially if you've ever worked in workforce management or human resource, I'd love to talk to you afterwards. Reach out to me. That's my shameless plug. So thank you for that. As I mentioned, I've worked a lot of different places, but I think for a lot of folks, my career path is probably very similar to a lot of you. Is that this was not what I planned on doing as a kid. I didn't grow up thinking about Jira boards or doing user stories. Instead, as I mentioned before, I got done with high school and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I went to University of Minnesota Duluth. I went there because they had a great jazz program. Knowing I wasn't going to be a musician, I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I got a marketing degree. I figured that was the most generic possible degree I could get and still make it feel like I could actually go do something with it. What I actually wanted to do when I graduated from college was I wanted to go work for this guy. I wanted to go work for Prince. I wanted to get into music production. I wanted to do that, but quite frankly, I had zero idea how to get a job there. Later on in life, I figured out you just show up and annoy people until they let you, until you can stay. But at that time, I didn't know. And so what I did was I searched the help wanteds, and I ended up getting a job at what's now Thomson Reuters, but at the time was West Publishing, doing customer support, phone support, technical support for lawyers. And what happened was I fell in love with technology. I did tech support online, customer support. I did on-site support. I did national consulting. And at some point, I got tired of having to explain to customers why our product didn't work the way they thought it should when I agreed with them. And so I ended up talking to some engineers. I asked them why it worked that way. They asked me how it should. I told them, they changed it, and I was like, "This is cool. This is a great way to make a living." And then that just turned into the slide that you saw before. So I think, again, like most people, this wasn't necessarily a straight line there. I will ask folks, if you don't notice, can you make sure you mute yourself, just to make so that way we get it. I've got the chat screen up, so if you've got questions or other things, I can I can see some of that as we go through there. So anyway, that's enough about me. So let's talk about why we're here. How is product management like jazz? Well, again, I'll start off with a couple different musical examples. So the first is from The Sound of Music. You see Julie Andrews. I think everybody knows the song A Few of My Favorite Things. But I'll just play a little snippet here for everybody.
Cream-colored ponies and crisp apple strudels, doorbells and sleigh bells and schnitzel with noodles, wild geese that fly with the moon on their wings. These are a few of my favorite things. Girls in white dresses with blue satin sashes, snowflakes that stay on my nose and eyelashes, silver white winters that melt into springs. These are a few of my favorite things. When the
So, I think everybody's heard that song before. I think if you close your eyes, you can picture the movie. But if you're a musician, you can also probably close your eyes and picture that orchestra. There's probably 100 people in a sound studio with a director, and they've got the music, and every time they play it, it's always going to sound that same way. Another thing about a few of my favorite things is it's turned into a classic jazz standard as well. And John Coltrane was I think the first to convert that over. And I want to have you listen to how John Coltrane played a few of my favorite things as well. And we can then talk about where the differences show up. Starts off and we hear what we're used to hearing, but then it starts to go differently. Then it starts to go really different. Magically, it all comes back. Back to what we're used to hearing and how we're hearing it, but very, very different, yet still the same song. And this is where it gets really crazy. Is again, they're the same, but they're not the same. If we were to look at the paper, and you don't have to be a musician to recognize, there's a lot of stuff on this page, and there's very dictated how everybody's going to play and when they're going to play, and you need a conductor, you need a director up there to keep everybody together. And every time you listen to it, this song will remain the same. It will take the same amount of time. The exact same song for what you just heard from John Coltrane is this single page. The single page that doesn't have a lot of writing on it. In fact, it's pretty white. As far as the amount of paper that's showing through the notes, and yet this song could be played and is played differently every single time. I've got a CD set of John Coltrane where I think there's 6 different versions of this, and they're all wonderful and they're all different, and they can last for 5, 10, 15 minutes depending upon the night, and that always just blew my mind as to how these two things could be there, but how you could have such creativity with such little structure. And that was really where I started to get through and think about this from a product management perspective. So let's convert that now into product. So I mentioned my career has been in lots of different places. So one of the places I worked at here in Minneapolis was at SPS Commerce. I joined SPS in 2002, and I was the sole product manager, the sole sales engineer, I was the designer, the webmaster, all of that. And we had about $6 million in revenue. Our challenge from a product perspective was, how do we go from being a small company to becoming a big company? And in that case, it was taking product skills and trying to figure out how do you create a new market. Well, I took those same skills, and 15 years later, I joined Target, and completely different product challenge. There, you have a $70 billion retailer. You have $3.5 billion worth of technical budget to work on it. But the idea is to bring product in and the product mentality to change how you think and work with technology, how you change it from being a cost center to being a leader and differentiator into the business. And those two environments couldn't have been any more different. The challenges from a product perspective couldn't have been any more different. Yet I was able to use the same skills and techniques in both companies to be successful. And I think, so to me, what I've realized is, and I'm sure most of you have, is that no two companies are the same. In other words, you can't have a playbook that says this is how you successfully build a product and you only do it this way, and you basically hand out sheet music or hand out instructions to people and have them do that. Instead, really what you have to do is you have to be able to understand what is the uniqueness of that company, what makes that company special, what are you trying to accomplish, what is the outcome that you're trying to reach, and be able to then take all of those skills, take that unique group of people, and be able to improvise with that unique mixture to create a unique outcome. And so when I think about it, oftentimes improvisation can be a little deceptive. Improvisation is not just randomly making stuff up. You don't pick things up. You don't do things as you go. And if you do, for those of you who have kids, you might recognize this. This is from the show Jesse. But if you don't have a plan for improvisation, you can end up having something that feels a lot like this. Yeah, basically just noise and dogs howling. So to be a great improviser, there are key parts that you need to have. First and foremost, you need to know your instrument. You have to be an expert on your instrument, and there are skills that you can develop through practice and craftsmanship to make you a skilled performer. You also need to have a band. A lot of improvisation is with others. It's taking a group of people, having an agreement, and then finding it. But you can't have all saxophone players, as much as I love saxophone. You can't have all drummers, or you can, but they're unique bands in themselves. But you need to find a group of people who have skills and knowledge that are beyond your own and figure out how to combine them. You need to pick a chart. A chart is the jazz term for a sheet of music. That's your structure, the plan. What are you trying to accomplish? And that unifies all of those people and allows them to work together. And then most importantly, you have to listen. Improvisation in jazz is about listening. It's playing something and hearing someone else playing off of that and changing and iterating. You usually don't come in with this is what the outcome's going to be, but you come in with we're going to have a conversation and we're going to listen and we're going to react. And so those are the foundations from improv. And so let's talk about how those then convert over into product management. So skill one, know your instrument. Dr. Sawyer is a professor at the University of North Carolina. He's written a number of books and teaches on creative learning, and he's written some things around music. And I thought this was a great idea, that even if you aren't going to be an improviser, if you do learn through improvisation, you develop the ability to think and have a deeper understanding of it, and thus be better prepared to interpret things that are planned and written. I thought that was a really cool way. So when we talk about knowing your instrument from a product management standpoint, it's really about knowing your part. Product management has discrete responsibilities in any organization. First and foremost, your job is to define the problem. Get yourself to a product market fit. You're also responsible for prioritization. If you do nothing else on a daily basis, providing an environment that drives prioritization and creating priority and driving the rest of the company through prioritization, you're going to give yourself a chance for success. Stakeholder management, I think we all know this. It's working through and as a role that doesn't have usually pure organizational power. You operate a lot on influence, which is the hardest form of leadership. You have to be really good at how you manage both internal and external stakeholders. And then back to that prioritization, managing those scarcity of resources. Again, whether I've worked for a 6-person startup or I worked for Target, there was never enough money, time, or engineers to be able to do all the things that we wanted to do. So regardless of your bank account, there is always a scarcity of resources, and you have to be good at that. And so what do you do? What do you do to make yourself good at that? Well, you got to practice your instrument. Much like a musician will practice scales and they'll practice etudes and a lot of other things, we as product managers have discrete skills that we can work on. We can work on our discovery skills. How do we find those problems? How do we figure out what the right thing is? How do we help define the problem and get real good clarity on it before we give it to the engineering team, which is also another part. You have to be good at delivery. A lot of people prefer one or the other. Like, there are people who love discovery and not great at delivery, and other people who just love to crank shit out. If you don't have both of them, neither one of them is really all that useful. Clearly, you need to work on the skills around leadership. We talked about stakeholder management and leadership through influence. There are very discrete things you can do, very specific things you can do to hone and improve your leadership skills. You need to work on innovation. Again, innovation is not always about coming up with the next Uber or the next Stripe. Sometimes innovation is about, how do I rethink an old problem in a new way? Or how do I get the most out of my limited and scarce resources and come up with a really clever, unique way? And obviously domain expertise, competitive analysis, price analysis, all of those things are really critical to become really good. And quite honestly, they're things that you can always get better at. One of the parts I love about product management, like music, is you're never going to perfect it. There's always a way, there's always more to learn. And quite honestly, the more you do it, the more you realize you have more to learn. And what I think is amazing now is we have meetups like this. We have the ability to talk. We're in what I believe is a renaissance-like time for product management. There are so many smart people writing so many intelligent, great things about it, whether it be through Mind the Product, through local events like Product Camp, through Silicon Valley Product Group, and some great thinkers like Nate Walkinshaw, John Cutler, and Melissa Perry. If you're not following them on Twitter, you're not reading. There's no excuse for you not to be working and getting better at your job. And frankly, I think it's amazing how much is out there for all of us. So that's knowing your instrument. The next thing you have to do is, if you're good at your instrument, you have to find your band. You got to find folks that you can play with. And this quote from Oscar Peterson, who's a great jazz piano player, it says, "It's the group sound that's important, even when you're playing a solo. You not only have to know your own instrument, you must know the others and how to back them up at all times." That's jazz. It's a conversation going back and forth. So if we take that group and we take that idea, product management is the band leader oftentimes. Notice I didn't say they're the director or they're in charge. Product management is the band leader. From that perspective, if we think about it, product management, we've seen this is a product tank sort of idea, is the triad, or the three legs of the stool. You've got product, you've got engineering, you've got UX, and we each have discrete roles, but we have a lot of intertwining as well. And so it's really important for us to be able to know what everybody's responsible for. Going back to that Oscar Peterson quote, even when you're doing your own thing, you need to understand who else is doing what they're doing and how they do it. So again, going back to product management, we have these roles and our responsibilities. UX owns owns how to create intuitive and user-friendly solutions. They own the first half of that how. So product manager comes up with, here's what we should do and why we should do it. UX is really about, how do we make it so that it is usable for our customers, that it is easy and it makes it easy for them to accomplish the goals that they have. They're responsible for user research and testing. They're responsible for developing that information architecture that's based on those user needs, that says not just how do I use the screen, but what's the entire world around how the context of I'm using this. Engineering is the other half of the how, and engineering really is about owning how to create those technical feasible solutions, because no matter how good of the idea that product management has or how beautiful the design UX has, if you don't actually have the ability to build it, or you can't build it in a sustainable way, then it's all for naught as well. As well as engineering then is responsible for that design and implementation and system and architecture. Now notice, I didn't say that they were the only ones to do this. They're responsible for it. If we go back to that Venn diagram of those three over there, I'm sure you're thinking about it in your organization or in other teams that you've worked. These lines aren't hard. Product management has opinions about intuitive solutions and is heavily invested in user research and has perspective on technology, as well as engineering, also has great ideas about what is the right problems to solve and how do we solve those problems and what are customers' problems. These are all things that people work together, but you have to understand you have responsibility for that. So again, if we want to extend this analogy out and put it actually into a band, the engineers are the rhythm section. They are what drives this. If you don't have a solid drummer, guitar player, bass player, piano player, and they're not locked in and rocking, I don't care how good the rest of the band is, it doesn't work. And while the product manager and the UX might be standing up front sometimes, it's in support of that. They might be playing the melody at one point and then they're doing harmony or they're backing up or doing other things. Everybody has a role to play. And if the product manager decides it's their job to start keeping time, which is the drummer's job, things start to fall apart. Having respect for the other people on your team and respecting their skills is important, but it's also important that you have that mixture of skills. This would be a really terrible band if there were 5 drummers in it. No offense to any drummers online, but I don't think it's anything that would be there. We've talked about getting good at our instrument. We've talked about finding other people who are good at our instrument. The next thing you have to do is you actually have to have a structure for what are you going to play together, and that's picking a chart. So let's, how do we pick that music? There's probably a lot of you on here, if you're in Minneapolis, that you were lucky enough to have known Dave Hussman. Dave was a larger-than-life person and a phenomenal thinker in product, as well as a kick-ass hair metal guitar player at one point in his life. But he had this great quote that said, if you don't know where you're going, it's easy to iteratively not get there. Because I think he would often get really frustrated about people's blind following of agile principles. Well, we have to be fast, we have to iterate, we have to do all these sorts of things, and that led to a belief that meant you don't have a plan. You just build stuff and magically things happen. And so I thought it was really apropos here. So let's talk a little bit about a chart. So let's go back to John Coltrane again. Let's go back to my favorite thing. So again, this single piece of paper would allow talented musicians to play together in a coordinated fashion for hours if they wanted to. I think when you listen to that music, you heard the my favorite things that you recognized, and all of a sudden John Coltrane kind of got off and he started playing some different stuff, and it started to get a little bit weird. And yet magically at one point they all came back together and were there. And that was all because of understanding what this chart is. So for the non-musicians, let me just explain a few things here. So first of all, these numbers in the upper left-hand corner, that's the time signature. It says this is in 3/4, which gives it that waltz feel, that 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. Right? That tells us, okay, this is how fast we're going to go and how and just kind of our fundamental pace that we're going to run at. Then these letters and squiggles here, these are chord changes. These are the representation of what are the appropriate notes in the sequence that they should be played. So for piano players and guitar players, they'll be playing these chords and they'll play them in this order. But the rest of the musicians, the soloists, will know that as they're playing, as they're going off of the written music, this is the sequence of possible notes that make sense. And if everybody's on that same page, they're working well, but not having to work with, here's the specific notes to play, but here's the universe of notes that are appropriate at this time. And then the most important thing is these repeat signs at the bottom and the top, which basically says when we get done, go back to the beginning and we'll just keep doing it and doing it. And we'll just iterate and iterate and iterate on this structure until we decide that we're done, and then we'll finish. But we'll finish at the end here. We won't finish in the middle. And so I think that to me always again feels very similar if you're listening to this, thinking about, well, that sure sounds a lot like agile development. It sure sounds a lot like what we're doing. But I think one of the things that people get lost on, and one of the online arguments right now amongst product people is do you need a roadmap, or are roadmaps evil? My opinion is that roadmaps are evil if they're misused, just like any other tool. I am a big fan of roadmaps because I believe a roadmap is not a list of stuff you're going to do. This is not a project list, and this is one of the big departures between project and product. is a roadmap is simply a tool to help you manage change. If you build a roadmap, you basically say, here's my list of assumptions. Here's what I think is our product market fit. Here's what I think is the right way to solve that. Here's what I think we're capable of doing based upon these inputs and these assumptions. Well, I think anybody that's ever built product knows that the moment you write a roadmap down, it's wrong because those assumptions change. New factors come in. And what you want is, if you don't have some structure to manage that, basically you have to reprioritize everything over and over and over and over again every time one of those assumptions changes, where a roadmap allows you to say, okay, here's something new that came in. Does it change any of our assumptions? If it doesn't change any of our assumptions, here's how we valued the work that we were planning on doing, the outcomes that we were trying to drive. Is this outcome different or better? If it is, great, let's put it in, and here's what we'll take out. So everybody in the company has an idea of how to contribute to what that is and understands what the rules are for changing. Now, the roadmap is only good if you actually have a strategy ahead of that. And that strategy is that unifying vision for everybody on what they want to be as a company. So if we were a band, we would have to have a general agreement as to the type of music we want to play. It would not work well if the drummer wanted to play heavy metal, the guitar player wanted to play country, and the saxophone player was playing jazz. That would create a lot of havoc, regardless of how good you are. So you need that strategy. And once you have that strategy and you combine it with a structure for how you prioritize, which is saying what's important, that product plan, that allows you then to use a roadmap effectively. Any one of these things by themselves and without the other starts to create some havoc. And obviously there are different time horizons on this. What I like to do is I like to start 2 to 3 years out, kind of get that vision of where we want to go to, and work our way back to where we can eventually get to, here's what we're working on stand-up today. And having that strategy, having that roadmap allows your product teams to be able to manage change without it having to be a centralized decision point. So again, everybody can listen, everybody can adjust as they go. So get to the last one. And to me, this is the most important out of all of this. And this is the place where most people will fall down and where bands will not be great. To the difference between a great band, a good band and a great band, the difference between a good product organization and a bad product organization is your ability to listen. And I think Stan Getz, this quote from Stan Getz is great. Stan Getz was a phenomenal saxophone player. A good quartet is like a good conversation among friends, interacting on each other's idea. I think we can all relate to this, where some of the best if you think back to some of the best conversations you had in life, whether it was sitting in your dorm room in college or sitting with your significant other or with your friends, if you think back, you didn't start out probably where you thought. It was one of those free form, like you were talking and somebody had an idea and then you started vamping on that and somebody else had an idea, and at some point you're all laughing or you're crying and you're like, how did we get here? It was because you were listening to each other and you were interacting and you were building upon each other's ideas. And that's where I think there's a lot of really good stuff that I'm not going to get too deep into today because there are way smarter people than me that have articulated this. But this is where you get into this idea of continuous discovery. This idea that, as Marty Kagan from Silicon Valley Product Group said, is constantly identifying, validating, and describing new product backlog items. Some of that discovery work will take a few hours, and other times it could take weeks or months, but it is always an ongoing process of ideation, validation, and description. And I think his partner in crime, Jeff Patton, takes it a step further, where he talks about this idea that development, which I think is what most of us tend to focus on, or most people tend to think of when they think about agile and product development, is this iterative development action, which is on the bottom. Jeff talks about a dual track or a dual lane sort of environment where both of these things happen simultaneously, that you are constantly doing discovery, where you're looking for new opportunities, new problems, you test them. You might test them a couple times. A lot of them will be terrible, and so you'll kill them, but you want to keep that evidence, and then you move and move, and eventually those things then feed into that development structure, and that allows you to have this ongoing conversation that as you learn more in the marketplace, you're constantly iterating, you're constantly thinking through that and working through it, and then again, the virtuous cycle comes back that everything that you release on feeds back up into the opportunities and those ideas and problems. If you're not familiar with Marty, if you're not familiar with Jeff Patton, highly recommend talking with them. Jeff Patton's one of the nicest human beings on the planet, and is one of the most approachable. So if you have never met him, I think if you reached out to him, you'd be shocked at the level of response that you would get from him. So,
for those that don't know him, he literally wrote the book on user story mapping. So,
yeah, exactly. And he's another former product manager. He's in Park City, Utah, I believe is where he lives, but he's on the road most of the time. A couple things to keep in mind with continuous discovery, because I think you can get super focused on this discovery. And one of the things I think is really important is, as a product manager, you have to remember you are not the boss. That even though your responsibility is to identify the problems, and your responsibility is to drive discovery, your team can and should help you drive what your product does. When you're doing really good discovery, that's an activity that involves everybody on the team. It's just the responsibility of the product manager to make sure that it's being done. The second thing is to remember that, again, this is improvisational, which means the sum of ideas is better than the individual idea. In other words, don't come in with that predetermined plan. Like, I've decided what the right thing is. Now let's do discovery to prove it right. I think what you need to do is you need to treat discovery like a scientist treats experiments, which a scientist experiments to prove their hypothesis wrong. And in the absence of being able to prove their hypothesis wrong, then you can assume that you're right. And so, from a music perspective, you don't want to come in with a predetermined solo. If the whole band has gone really soft and the whole vibe is down, you don't want to come in just screaming because that was what you decided before you ever started playing. It just feels weird, and it always comes off wrong. So to wrap that up, let's kind of go back to what those things are. So again, from a product management perspective, know your instrument, work on those discovery, delivery, leadership, innovation, and domain expertise skills. There's a ton of material out there. There's a ton of things to do, and you can continually get better at that. Find your band, find good, talented design partners, engineering partners, and know how to balance the roles between all of you and where it fits, because every team is different. Every environment is different. The moment you change one of the players in this band, it's good to go back and rethink about how you balance those roles. Pick a chart. In other words, it's critical to have a clear strategy and a roadmap to give you and your organization a clear direction, and to be able to, most importantly, manage that inevitable change that happens. And then finally, listen. Utilize continuous discovery to learn and adapt and really dig in, going back to knowing your instrument, but figuring out how can you as a team, as an organization, take those things on. So that is kind of my thought. You can reach me at any of these pieces of contact information. I have a blog. Not many people read it. It's mostly for me to write stuff down so I don't forget it, but feel free to go out and